Yeah, looking at the timing, I think it would make sense to start. It was officially scheduled at 10:40, but we're a few minutes late, but let's slowly kick it off. Bless you. Guys, welcome to the session. It's still early morning. Everyone still awake? Yeah, it was a good session of Duncan, I can understand. Welcome to my session about VMware Cloud Director. For today, what do I want to talk to you guys about? Well, it's VMware Cloud Director, of course. So that's the topic for today. Other than that, at the end, I've got a demo, and I invite you all to instruct me to do things to break the lab. I'd like to rebuild it. I want to build it from scratch again, so I challenge you guys, help me to get it broken so I have a reason to actually start rebuilding it. First off, who am I? I'm Bart Oevering. I work for Consia. We're a company based in the Netherlands and also doing a lot in the Nordics. I blog, I'm on LinkedIn, I have my own blog, which I do on my own website, which is in English. We also blog for our company RedLogic, which was taken over by Consia. And I also do presentations about the topics that I'm doing. And that got me a vExpert status for 3 times now. So yeah, I work for RedLogic. We were taken over by Consia. We do a lot of VMware, Cisco, Palo Alto. We do networking. We do clouds, hybrid clouds, and that sort of stuff. But that's enough with the promotion. I'm here by myself. So VMware Cloud Director. I went to search, okay, what is this VMware Cloud Director product actually? And I wanted to take you guys along with what it does and where you actually use it for. Because who knows VMware Cloud Director here? Most people do, that's perfect. Well, you all guys know there's a lot of products that VMware uses. We've got VMware vSphere, we've got NSX, we can lay the AVI load balancer with that as well. If we bundle this correct, we'll call it VMware Cloud Foundation because it actually is the same thing. It's a stack of products, and we need to manage that and provide that services. So we actually have this director or conductor managing these products and handing those resources out. But I wanted to look at what VMware did for an explanation, and I went on their website and see, okay, VMware, how are they explaining what this product actually is? I took their text of it. Don't go read it, we'll go through it together, because it's a quite long text if I looked at it with a lot of keywords in it. So this is the explanation that VMware is using, and I was like, okay, let's try to break this down for you guys to see what it actually is and what it does. So I started breaking it down. There's 2 sentences in there, and the first sentence is, at its core, VMware Cloud Director transforms physical resources, such as compute, memory, and storage, and converts that into a data center into a flexible provider data center. Okay, so far so good. I can still grasp what is going on here. In the second part, it tells you that, well, cloud service providers have the capability to allocate resources from that pool of provider data center that we have to multiple organizations. So, okay, there's a shared resource that we can do, and differentiate in those service levels for various customers. So, okay, it's actually creating a lot of shared resource pools and creating some kind of multi-tenancy portal that I can use. And I was like, okay, this gave me a lot of information. And actually with that, I was like, well, okay, now everyone understands. But this actually gave me more questions than answers. So I was like, okay, what is this product actually doing? Where is its responsibilities? What is it looking like? And what can we reach with it? And I went digging in the VMware slides, and I found a very big slide. VMware loves these slides where they put all the spheres in there, and they show all kinds of like keywords and explain what a product actually is. And I found this one about VMware Cloud Director, and it shows, well, it's elastic secure virtual data centers, it's multi-site management, thriving ISV ecosystem. I was like, ISV? What is ISV? Any guys have a guess here what ISV is? Now, I needed to Google it myself as well. It was independent software vendor. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. You can put plugins. Okay, so that's what they want to achieve with that. Sure, whatever you guys want to explain and market it with, but cloud migration, secure cloud, and I was like, okay, this slide is telling me nothing. It shows functionalities, but it's still not helping me to see what the product does. So I went further, and I found a design that actually helps me to see more what it's doing. So if we look at a design on the bottom side, we've got our infrastructure. We've got vCenter Server, NSX, vSAN, and ESXi, and we put that in our infrastructure. And on top of that infrastructure, as the text said, we've got this provider virtual data center that we can use. And in that provider virtual data center, we, in this example, have tenant A. Tenant A is having an organization virtual data center, which is allocated to that provider virtual data center. So there's a link there, and you can provide resources from there. Okay, this shows me a little bit more. There were more examples. So I went looking further. So here we've got tenant B and tenant C. Tenant B and C are actually doing a shared pool of resources because they have their own organization virtual data center, which is their resource allocation. But they're both using the provider virtual data center 02. So provider virtual data center 2 is a shared resource pool, and tenant B and C are using that resource pool to allocate their VMs and compute memory and that sort of stuff. And then there's another example that you could build. That's tenant D. Tenant D is a single tenant, but they have two organization virtual data centers where they're actually having a different provider virtual data center. So there's a provider virtual data center 03 and 04. And here you could say, okay, let's say 04 is having some GPUs. This way the customer can choose in which provider virtual data center they want to deploy that VM. So it becomes a multi-tenant shared environment. They can log in. I've got multiple tenants on the top, and they have their own pool of resources, which is allocated in that organization virtual data center, and they're using a physical provider virtual data center underneath. Okay, this shows me a little bit more what the product is doing, and I was like, okay, where does the responsibility go? Where is it for the customer, or where does it go for the cloud provider? And I found this image, and I was like, okay, there's a lot of information in here. In the bottom, we've got the whole stack with our infrastructure again, and on the top, we've got networks, VMs, and OSs and applications. So actually, as a customer or a tenant, you're actually responsible for the topmost part of this stack. You go for the operating system, for the application, for your virtual machine. You can configure it yourself. You can choose which resources it has, as long as it fits your pool. And you can create your own networks, as long as the provider is using NSX, of course. So where does the responsibility of the cloud provider then goes? Well, the cloud provider goes all the way from the bottom actually to the top, but not into the virtual machine. Actually, that depends a little bit on your contract with your customer. You could choose to have the passwords of your customer VMs, but in most situations, as an ISP or MSP, you wouldn't want to have access to the virtual machine of your customer. They would make their own images, set their own passwords, be responsible for that part of the infrastructure themselves. So I was like, okay, this is going more. I started understanding what this product is actually doing, but when you're using it, would it add anything to you, actually? And I started to think, how can I compare this product to anything else that's out there? And the other day I stumbled upon some resources in the city. And I was like, well, that's fun. You could compare this. You've got these shared bikes here in Belgium, and you've got them in a lot of other places as well. And those things are actually big shared pools. I've got a shared pool of bikes, and I want to have customers that have the possibility to use those. And we want extensive self-service because I don't want to have a customer ringing up every time like, hey, I want to rent a bike. Now, we have an app on the phone and we can use that. So tenants require their own access to that pool of resources because we only want to show them what's in their neighborhood and not what's in very other cities because, yeah, they're not going to access that anyway. Is VMware Cloud Director the only possible solution that you have? No, there's multiple solutions you can do it. There's always, you can build something yourself based on Ansible. You could use Terraform, of course, to leverage that infrastructure as well. And otherwise, you just use Cloud Director. That's what we're in this session for. And I already asked if you guys know Cloud Director. Many people of you do. But did you know that VMware Cloud Director was not the original name of the product? It actually started off as VMware Lab Manager. And I went digging through a slide decks to find an image on how it actually looked. And this is a very old Internet Explorer with a toolbar installed. I don't know. I haven't used toolbars in ages. I don't know. Do you guys still have toolbars in Internet Explorer? I hope not, because yeah, that's not gonna go well. But I went looking for a timeline, and I was like, okay, how old is the product? Because I want to see that it's mature and that it's getting traction with VMware and how mature it actually is. And I found a timeline, and it's actually a very old product. The people using with it, do you actually know when the first version, so 1.0.0 of VMware Cloud Director was released?
We got 210, 1 bit.
2010, 2011? Any other guesses? No guesses? Well, you're pretty close. It was the 30th of August, 2010. So it's already 13 years, 9 months, and 8 days old. Okay, let's do days, 5,030 days. So it's actually a product that's been around for a very, very long time. They haven't even started on NSX when they started with this product. So if we would compare that, I'd like to compare stuff, and I was like, okay, what could we do? And I went comparing it with bloggers. So the timeline was based by Anthony Spiriti. Any guesses on when his first blog was released? His first blog on his website? No guesses? I needed to look it up, scroll back, it was 2012. So it's 2 years after the first version of VMware Cloud Director. Who knows Thomas Futja? Yeah, anyone doing something with Cloud Director and anyone searching or Googling on it should probably found a blog of him. Any guesses on his first blog? No, 2017. That's way later after the first release. In the Netherlands, we've got Daniel Zuthoff, who does a lot with VMware Cloud Director. His first blog was 2019, which was way after it. I was like, okay, there's one person I could compare it even more to. Well, we're in Belgium. Let's find Christoph. Christoph also blogs. Any guesses on his first blog? No, it was also 2019. So you can see that there's a lot of people starting to use it more and more, and it's been around very long. And we also see that in the timelines of releases. So on the top line, we see the releases of VMware Cloud Director, and on the bottom line, we see the releases of NSXT. And it's constantly following each other. New release of Cloud Director, or a new release of NSXT also causes a new release of VMware Cloud Director. And I was like, okay, we've got releases. Let's dive deeper into the releases. And I went to set it in a table, because I like tables. And I used ChatGPT to convert the dates, because VMware uses American date notation, and you cannot do anything with it. So I transformed it and put it in a graph. And I was like, okay, well, it's building, but there's a dip in 2021. So I went digging through the release notes, see and find why that dip was there. And I found out that they started with Kubernetes and NSXT support to incorporate that in VMware Cloud Director. So they put a more focus on it, a little bit less releases came, and then there was a spike, getting more releases into it. I was like, okay, how can I show you guys that this product is mature and actually used a lot and it grown over time? And I went, okay, documentation, Cloud Director Administrator's Guide. Any guesses on the how many pages there were in the first version of the document for VMware Cloud Director?
150.
150. Well, you're not that far off. It was 104. You're pretty close. Any guesses on the Cloud Director Provider Manual in 10.5? Thousands. Okay. I'll break it down for you, because the Provider Manual is 551, but that's not the only manual they wrote. First version was one manual. Now they started doing more. So there's an Install, Configure, and Manage manual. There's also another tenant manual, and it counts up to 1,228. So you weren't that far off, but it's getting more and more documentation, more and more traction and focus from VMware. So we see in the documentation, it's 1,080% more documentation than version 1. Okay, that's a big growth. So you can really see that it's getting more traction. And then I started to think, like, why is this product getting more traction? Why is VMware focusing on this project? What are they achieving with it? So I started digging around, started seeing if there was anything I can do, and I don't know, who was at VMware Explorer in 2022? Well, then you remember this slide. It was from the former CEO, Raghu, and he was on stage explaining the typical cloud journey of a customer. And he explained, well, customers want to go to the cloud. This was 2022. We'll go to cloud first. Everything needs to be cloud-based. We go to cloud chaos. And then we go to Cloud Smart because that's where we want to be. And this actually triggered me. It started to get me thinking, and then you get this crazy thoughts in your brain, and you go line stuff out. And then I started, okay, which product is also focused in here? And I went, okay, that's VMware Cloud Foundation. VMware Cloud Foundation, it's more of a framework with all the versions next to each other, and you can bundle the products and use that actually in the environment. But what if you would use that in all clouds? So I've got a private cloud, I've got a Google Cloud or an Oracle Cloud. If it's all VMware Cloud Foundation, the software versions are the same, the product functions in the same way, and I could actually build this super cloud that they're building here. So if we lay VMware Cloud Director on top of there, then actually it becomes a very big super cloud where you can move VMs from a provider virtual data center to another provider virtual data center. So if I would spin up a VM in my private cloud, I could actually relocate that VM and go to Oracle Cloud and say, okay, it's now moved. Just need to build the network underneath, but the VM is able to move because it's all based on VMware, and that's actually what you can do. And then I was like, okay, if you start thinking about something and where you want to go, you have that in mind, you actually start moving towards that goal, meaning that you actually will go to that goal because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I swayed a little bit, of course, here. VMware Cloud Director, this was a little bit of an history, so let's get back on track and let's start diving deep. But to lay that foundation on how providers utilize NSX to build through VMware Cloud Director and also use NSX Projects, let's dive into NSX a little bit first. Anyone still running NSXV right now? Yep. Oh, when are you doing migrations? Any migrations in progress? With VMware Cloud Director on top? Good luck. I've been working for an MSP for over a year to migrate their customers. So yeah, in the past we had NSXV. It was, of course, acquired by VMware when they bought VMware, or when they bought Nicara in 2012. So they've been transforming that, and actually it was tightly coupled into ESXi, but now it's been moved away to get that tight integration. They're saying that they're doing a lot more KVM. I haven't seen that in version 4 that much anymore, but they're still saying that they're doing, so that's fine. But I wanted to see, okay, how is NSX going for that cloud proposition again? So again, I went diving into their slide decks, in the VMware slide decks, and I found this slide that said, okay, this is the NSX networking vision for VMware. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting slide. What pops out here? Well, it's first this one. NSX is the anchor for VMware's cloud vision for private, public, and hybrid clouds. So NSX has focus. Keep in mind NSXT, NSXV, of course, it's into the recycle bin and they'll start over. But NSX is a foundation, so that's very important for them to have that. And it's also, again, mentioned in that part, it's foundational for VMware clouds to bring consistent networking and security, because you can bring that security policy that you have on an NSX, you can bring it to clouds as well, because you have NSX there. So it brings that consistent networking and security. And then I found this simple NSX design. I think everyone should have seen this if you do anything with NSX. Otherwise, maybe read a manual once in a while. This one is really the first image that you'll find out there if you go digging. So it's very simple. So we've got a physical router, we've got a tier 0 gateway, we've got tier 1 gateways hooked up to that with networks and VMs underneath. And I was like, okay, how does this transform into a VMware Cloud Director NSX design? Again, dove into the documentation. IT guys love documentation. But actually, it's not that different. Only now we call them organization virtual data centers. But I still see the main components. I have a physical router on top. I've got a tier 0. I've got 2 tier 1 gateways. We'll call them organization virtual data center edge gateways. If you look in NSX, it's just a T1. It's not that difficult. We just name it differently in the UI. We've got networks and VMs. So actually, it's still the same. But now comes the power of where VMware Cloud Director actually functions. They started developing a functionality that is really out there for providers. And actually, NSX stole it, and we'll get to that. But it's called the IP spaces. Anyone using IP spaces in VMware Cloud Director? Lab or production? Nice. Yeah, the rest is still working towards that. I guess a lot of IP blocks. So let me take you to what IP Spaces does, because I started using it in production as well. I started in my lab because I was like, okay, how does this work? And it didn't work for me at all. Scratched my lab, started over, and then actually found the right manuals. And then we started using it in production as well to help the customers to build that environment. But what it actually does is it gives me the possibility to influence which route announcements are being done to the physical router. So in this situation, I've got two IP spaces. There's an IP space alpha, which is a private IP space, and there's an internet IP space, which is a public marked IP space. And for me as a provider, I can define which IP addresses or ranges are in there. So I can choose the ranges, and I can choose which route announcements will be done, if they're even allowed to do route announcements, because sometimes private IP ranges, I wouldn't want to announce them because it has no use. I don't want to have them on my physical router. I might want to have them somewhere else, but not on my internet gateway or something. So in this situation, there's a few networks in here. The internet one is doing the route announcements. The alpha private space is not doing those. So if we look at them, we've got a 10.10. And there's an 80.80. And if I would translate this image into a routing table for that internet router, it's actually a very easy routing table. It shows only the 80.80 networks, and it will show, okay, if you want to reach this one, go to gateway 2. If you want to reach the other one, go to gateway 1. Therefore, I can influence which IP addresses will be shown on my physical network. Well, this was the easy part. We can make it a little bit more complex. Let's dive deep, I said. So now we've added a MPLS connection. So both tenants here have a MPLS connection to their on-prem. With the IP spaces, I can influence that which uplinks are to be used for that IP space in the route announcement. So I can influence, okay, from this router, this IP space is only allowed to do the route announcements to the MPLS router, and the internet-facing IP addresses are only allowed to do route announcements there. That makes it really handy. If you would look at the configuration, it's not that readable, but you can choose public, so that's public IP spaces that everyone can choose. There's private, which is more for your infrastructure components that you want to reserve that customers could see but not choose. And there's private IP ranges for themselves to actually look into. You then define those, and you can have a few configuration items. We'll go through this in lab, it's more fun. But yeah, we've got these IP spaces, and I told you already, well, it's something that they integrated into VMware Cloud Director, but actually they're starting to build it into NSX as well. Only now they call it NSX Projects. Sorry, NSX Projects, not the Honda NSX, of course. So that multi-tenant environment, so if we look at a single tenant, I wanted to define what I mean with multi-tenant. Single tenant, each customer has his own portal, own database, and they're using through that own portal. If we then look at the multi-tenant aspect of it, there's one portal where the customer logs in. That portal will differentiate on what the customer is, and therefore creating that multi-tenant environment and creating that same database or using that same database. So before NSX Projects, we still had the possibility to create NSX firewall rules and do the isolation. We could do segmentation for our customers to have VRFs or tier zeros and separate that out. But where it went wrong is that when we wanted to provide logging to that customer, the customer had a single portal and they could see everything of every customer and every part of the infrastructure you were logging into there. So login side, it doesn't differentiate between customers. It is not a multi-tenant application. So that's a bit annoying because customers want to have logging access because we're doing firewall rules nowadays. With Cloud Director, they can manage their own firewall rules. And they want to have logging of that because stuff gets dropped, stuff is not working. But in this environment, you need to have some complicated environment to split out logging, and it gets complicated. So with NSX Projects, the possibility came to actually separate out those loggings. So we now set a log identifier on the project. And with that log identifier, we can separate out the syslog messages because it's going to be a prefix for every log message that's being written to the log server. And in the syslog server, you can separate those. You build the project, so there's a project 1 here and a project 2. And you can build a project admin that only has access to that specific part of the resources. And on top of that, you can still have shared resources, which is the middle part, which is shared or only visible for the admin as long as they're using it. So I was building all of this in my lab, and then I had a part of my lab running, and VMware came with a new version, as they do always. I was like, cool, let's see what this does. I had the presentation scheduled the week after, and I started reading, and I was like, okay, 10.5.1, cool. Dug up a PDF, and it had a nice graph in it that showed, okay, these are new and enhanced features. And I was like, okay, going through it, what are they doing? Well, on the left side, route advertisements provide topology intents, and I was like, ooh, that's going to be interesting. That's something with the IP spaces. In the middle, auto-configure NAT and firewall intentions. Ooh, again, something with the IP spaces. Sounds interesting, want to learn more. And then on the right side, VCD tenancy aligned with NSX projects. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. I want to see how that works. How are they using those API calls? But it made me scrap my lab because I had NSX 3.2 installed. I was stupid, go for an old version. Okay, let's scrap NSX out of it. Let's do 4.1, and then we can actually integrate it because you do need a new NSX version for it. And with that in mind, I think it's good to start heading towards my lab. Slight warning, if you like Portal, good job, me too. Everything in my lab is based around Portal. So if you want to start gaming, I had one customer saying, oh, I gamed the whole weekend because of you. I do apologize, but actually, have fun. So what can we do in the demo? Well, it's just my lab environment. We'll dive into the live lab. If you want to see anything, just pop up your questions. It's not going to be a big problem. We'll see what we can do. We can enable NSX tenancy in an organization. Let's walk through it. We can go into the IP spaces, and we'll add an org VDC in there as well. First off, my lab topology. Sadly, I don't have BGP peering with my upstream provider. So I'm not having actual public IP addresses in my space. If you see anything that starts with 10.120.25, just assume that's my public IP space, because that's what I configured in my lab. Anything else outside of the 10 range is private IPs. So I got an edge cluster, which is called T0S, S for shared. I'm actually using GLaDOS as a T0 shared again as well. I've got Cave Johnson as a first tenant, and I've got Doug Redman as a second tenant. And this is all configured into the network. And I would say let's dive into that. And I want to have a duplicate screen, please. Then I can see what I'm doing as well. Yeah, you all seen the Cloud Director portal, so let me just log in. And let me log into NSX as well. I know I'm not running backups. And my licenses are about to expire, yes. So yeah, this is the default overview. Most of you guys know this. So when you have this cloud portal provider, these are, as a provider when I log in, these are the organizations created. And an organization can have a set of resources, but some in mine don't have one. So Cave Johnson has a set of resources allocated to him. Doug Redman and the Weighted Companion Cube don't have that yet, but we'll go through that. So first off, if I look into NSX, this is a new button which was introduced in 4.1. That's the NSX Projects button. So we don't have any NSX projects in here right now because I turned it off for Cave Johnson. That's not turned on, but let's go ahead and turn it on for Doug Redman. And let's add some resources for him. So there's a new button in here that says NSX Tenancy. As we can see right now, it's inactive. So we'll just go activate it. Here's that log identifier that I spoke of earlier that you can set. In this case, I just set it to the same name as I gave the tenant, so it's Redman. And I'll save this. So it's now active. Do you think that there's already an NSX project right now in the NSX manager? Not yet. Okay. Well, you are correct. So there's no NSX project here. Let's just refresh this interface. It's not here yet. So let's start adding some resources. Redman. We'll just use that name as well. We'll link it to the right organization. We'll hook it up to Lab 02 because that's what I'm running in. I don't want to have resource limits at all. We'll give it an unlimited storage profile. And this overview already changed. Because that NSX tenancy button is turned on, the only option I get on top of here is the NSX tenancy. It's an added button or a toggle that it will be marked in there. And I can no longer select the pool that it's actually doing, because it will select that pool automatically for you. Going through, okay, start adding those, please. Is there, at this point, maybe an NSX project? I see some nods like, yeah, probably, maybe, yeah. Let's have a look. So now it's been created. Now the NSX project is there, and we can also see what it is actually configured. We'll open this one, and we can see here that log identifier has now been set. And again, where we see that the NSX team is taking over the features from Cloud Director, IP spaces, is the possibility to set external IPv4 blocks here. So they saw that feature in Cloud Director, were like, hey, that's something interesting. We need to get that into our product as well. So they're working actively towards that. So let's go into this one. I'll show the IP spaces that I've created because I've already pre-created a few of them. So I've got a public IP space, and Redmond has a private IP space. If we dive into the public IP space, first off, the general part, description, I've put the range that I'm using, and I'm using an internal scope and an external scope. So the external scope, actually, I mentioned that they have this button nowadays where you can auto-configure NOT and firewall. If you use the auto-configure NOT, it will actually get an IP address from that external IP range. So you define those because it's pushing /31s out of that range. The internal scope has actually been used to give customer prefixes. You can define what you can use. So the IP range is, again, that single IP range. And then there's a few prefixes here defined. In the quota, it's really interesting. You can set quotas for that IP space with how many a customer can request. And this is very interesting. You as a provider need to be very much aware that you can actually request everything that is in there. So you can get yourself outside of quota. I found that out the hard way. I was requesting stuff and I was like, hey, I didn't request this. So here you can already see that I did this in the past, and there's a custom quota on this customer. Let's quickly just disable that so we'll have the default quota in here. The network topology, so this tab is also quite new, where it shows, okay, the route advertisements here are allowed. When we do the auto-configure rules, it's also, again, another setting that you can do nowadays. Default give me an SNOT rule. You can also say do a no SNOT rule automatically, and it says build a matching firewall rule for me as well. And that's all in that button that we had before. And of course, you can see the allocations which are now allocated to a customer. So if we go into the networking tab of the tenant, we first need to create a edge gateway, of course. Any suggestions for a name for the edge gateway? Just shout something. Don't say ITQ because I won't do that one. Just come with a suggestion, guys.
Cookie.
Cookie. So also right here, let's do the IP management using IP spaces. Provider gateway, we will link it to that. In this case, we'll do a edge cluster as well, which is my T1 cluster, because I've got a dedicated cluster for that. And let's build this one. And we'll hook up a network here as well. We'll create a routed network. We'll hook it up to a cookie. And I'll call this one milk. And here it becomes possible to actually request an IP address from those IP spaces. So there's a public one, that's why they put it in here, that's what you see. And there's also that private one mentioned here, and you can request IP addresses straight from here. And as you can see, I can just request every prefix that I actually created or mentioned in that IP space. But you also saw the quota was actually on the /29 and the /30. So the customer is not allowed to request the other ones. But for me as a provider, I'm able to allocate these. So if I would now say, let's give me a 20/27, it will go like, okay, give me a second, I'll allocate it for you. And it will come back like, okay, this is the IP space that I've allocated for you. I'll go like, well, that's fine. What else goes with milk and cookies? Chocolate. I'll write it in Dutch, otherwise that's going to be hard. Here the prefix that I created for them is just /2024s. So this was what you could do with your customer. You could discuss with them, hey, you're using private IP ranges. What prefix do you want to be able to allocate? You can fine tune that with your customer, say, okay, let's just do 27s or 24s. And you say, okay, well, we'll do that for you. And it says, okay, I've allocated one for you. And it goes like, perfect. Go do that. And it's doing that as well. So the neat thing about NSX Projects is for me as a provider, I can still see all the stuff. I just need to refresh. And it's not doing it. I think my lab is broken. Ah, perfect, good job. So what would normally happen if you create those? Am I in the right? I'm in the right one. Let's see if it's under the project then. Yes, look, that's where it goes wrong. I was actually in the default project and not in the all one. So when I log into the NSX projects as a project admin, this is the only thing I can see. I can see the segments here that were created for me. And I can see the tier 1 gateway. And I can see to which gateway, tier 0 gateway, that is actually linked. And I can see that that one is actually residing in the default NSX project. And I can see some statistics about it. I can see the IP addresses, but that's about it. They're working still on VPCs. It's growing. And that's more where they start working to get that IP spaces functionality to NSX, so you can run it without Cloud Director on top. But if I now would go to all projects, and I know that all progress will get lost, there's still one tier 0 gateway because I just have one. But here we can see all components for all tenants in here. So this one is dedicated to a NSX project, but I can still have access to it and I can still see it. For me as an administrator, it makes it easy to see which resources are allocated. And when I need to troubleshoot as an MSP, there could be maybe 20, 50, 100 customers on here. I can easily just select the project of that customer and start diving deep into their infrastructure instead of having a list of like thousands of segments that I need to go through, which are from 20, 30, 100 customers again. So it really makes troubleshooting also for an ISP, MSP easier to do. If I now would look at the route advertisements, so here's the 10.120.25, here's the 192.168. So if I would dive into my upstream router, this was before we started, so these are the segments in here. Let's see if we added one, and we can see that this one was added. It's the 128/27, which was the one that we requested earlier. So that was automatically propagated to our upstream router, because I have a B2B connection between them, but that private IP address is still separated and private to that customer. If I would go to that scenario where I have an MPLS, that will be my next lab, I can use the same shared T0, and I could link that uplink to specific interfaces of that T0 and say, okay, these interfaces are allowed these IP spaces, and this interface set is allowed these IP spaces. So I can differ that, but that's for a future lab for me to build, because I haven't done that. And that's what I wanted to show you guys. So are there any questions, or do you want to see anything in Cloud Director? It's new versions, new stuff. I can click through it or see that we can build it together. And otherwise, thanks for your attention.